part 3. Save. Yeah, let's go. Yeah. How is everyone doing today? We are back reading the Metaphysics by Aristotle, which has beautiful um, the beautiful caveat of being I think these are getting copyright striked because I think technically it is copyright infringement. I don't know. I'm not sure. But it doesn't matter because like I'm such a small channel that me getting any sort of copyright issue is like, oh no, I'm getting $0 from my $0. You know what I mean? Either way, let us begin on Aristotle. This time we got up to we read book Alpha last time and we finished the introduction. This time we've got book Alpha the Lesser, and I'll see how I go. I have some uni assignments that I need to do. So if I just read Alpha the Lesser, oh wow, that's really short. That's only 10 pages. How long is book Delta? Delta. We'll see. We'll see how we go. Maybe we'll get up to Gamma. I reckon we can do that. We can get up to Gamma gang. But currently, we're just on book Alpha the Lesser. So let us begin in this chapter, and we're back with the obligatory yap fest from the translator, which I actually I've grown fond of. I think he's actually quite decent. In this chapter, Aristotle makes some general comments on the prospects for making progress with philosophical investigations. These are, on the one hand, difficult because of the extent and variety of the field, but on the other hand, they are easy in that human beings have a natural aptitude to philosophize, at least to some extent. What is hard is to do philosophy well, just as it is hard for moles to see by daylight. A recipe for progress, at any rate, is collaboration. The best way to pursue the object of philosophy is by systematic inquiry in a well-organized institution. It is a striking feature of the metaphysics that it suggests that philosophy is naturally a group activity, not a matter of individual personal inspiration. In the second half of the chapter, Aristotle makes some remarks about truth. Truth here is something closer perhaps to the concept of reality. Aristotle thinks that things, especially causes, have greater or lesser truth depending on whether they have more or less being. Interesting. So I remember in book Alpha, it was really just sort of a history lesson, or the history of philosophy book, and we just covered Plato, Aristotle, and like all those other, not Plato and Aristotle, sorry, Plato and a bunch of older pre-Plato guys and their views on reality, and Aristotle just went about basically saying that they're all wrong. And I think here we're actually going to start getting into a little bit of philosophy, but we'll see. The investigation of the truth is in a way difficult and in a way easy. An indication is that no one can worthily reach it, nor does everyone completely miss it. But each thinker says something about nature, and individually they make small contributions to it, and from them all together a certain volume arises. So that if the situation was in the proverb, who could miss the doors? In this way, then, it is easy. But the difficulty of grasping the whole and not merely a part shows how difficult it is. And perhaps its difficulty exists in two ways. Not in the things, but in us as responsible for them. For just as bats' eyes are towards daylight, so in our soul is the mind towards those things that are clearest of all. And we should not only be grateful to those in whose opinions we at all share, but also to those who have gone astray. For even the latter have contributed something, since they have prepared the condition for us. For if Prometheus never existed, there would be a lot of lyric poetry that we would not have, and if Phrynis had not existed, then neither would Prometheus. And it is the same with the theorists of nature, for from some of them we have taken over certain doctrines, whereas others were responsible for their existence. I think this is like kind of true. Like an interesting example that I'll use from like church history is the fact that heresies pop up fairly regularly in church history. But one of the cool things about that is, as a result, you got, especially in the first few centuries, you got the creeds, right? You got all these different people who came together and figured out the correct theology because of the as a response to incorrect theology. So, I think it's probably Aristotle is probably the correct in regards to philosophy here. It probably is good that you have people who go astray sometimes, because that can help you ascertain the truth, even if it is by showing what isn't the truth. Anyway, let's continue. For truth is the aim of theoretical thought as action is of practical thought. And if we consider how things are, the cause is not in itself, but the practical thinkers consider what is relevant to a context. But we do not know the truth without the cause. And this is all the more true in each case in which synonymy arises. Synonymy, what does that mean? Does that just mean like synonym? Like when things are the same? State of being synonymous. Yeah. As fire is the hottest thing, for it is the cause of heat for other things too, so that it is more true in each case that the earlier thing is the cause, and so it is necessary that the principles of the eternally existing things are most true. For they are not just sometimes true, nor is there any cause of their being, but rather they are such causes for other things. So that as each thing is related to being, so is it to truth. That's a truth nuke right there. I like that. And yeah, I think that in a way is true. If something's dependent on circumstance, in a way it is less, I don't know if less true is the right word, but maybe like less eminent as a truth than a circumstantial truth. I don't know, maybe. Anyway, let's continue. Alpha the Lesser 2. The central purpose of this chapter is to meet a possible objection in principle to the idea of understanding the cause of something, which we have seen to be central to understanding the truth of things, and thus acquiring wisdom. The goal of philosophy, the possible objection, is that any case of causation will involve an infinite series of causes. Aristotle considers that this objection, if it were sustained, would destroy his conception of philosophy, and he accordingly devotes a large number of arguments to rebutting it. The main argument is that any series of causes that in any series of causes, the intermediate causes between the start and end of the series must both cause and themselves be caused. Therefore, there must therefore always be some first cause which is not itself caused. This sort of argument against infinite causal series is developed at greater length in Book Lambda. Moreover, just as a causal series must have a beginning, so must it also have an end. Any process has a natural and well-defined endpoint. The idea of infinite causal series is equally absurd for final and formal as for motive causation, since it would destroy in one case the notion of a goal and in the other the very possibility of thought and knowledge about objects. The same consideration rules out the possibility against which Aristotle has already argued, that there could be an infinite variety of causes. I think it's interesting. Is there an infinite series of causes, or is it finite? I think. I guess we'll find out why he thinks there isn't. But um, you know, one thing is that what if you have a finite series of causes that's circular? What then? How does that fit in? Because it's not infinite, but nor does it have a beginning and end, a fixed beginning and end. But either way, I think you sort of, I've never read Leibniz, and I want to. I probably should. But he sort of touches on this as far as I know. And he's like, yeah, well, if the whole series of causes, be it an infinite regression or not, if they're all contingent, then as a series, the series of causes needs a cause because everything in the series is contingent. But yeah, let's see how he refutes this. But there is some principle, and that the causes of the entities are not infinite, either in perspective or in form, is clear. For neither the derivation from matter nor relative terms can sustain an infinite regress. That for the sake of what should sustain an infinite regress, such that walking is for the sake of health, and this is for the sake of happiness, and happiness for the sake of something else, and thus one thing is always for something else. And it is the same with essence. For of middle things, of which there is an extreme and prior, it is necessary that the prior is the cause of the things that come. Hey, I'm back. Oh man, I'm listening to no music this time round. And one of the problems that I get with that is my headphones have no audio input, so they automatically turn themselves off. I need to find a way of like fixing that. But yeah, anyway, let's continue. For if we had to say which of these three is the cause, we would say the first, for it would certainly not be the last, for it is the last of nothing. But neither would we say the middle term, for it is of one thing, and it makes no difference if it is one or many, nor whether infinite or limited. But of the things that are unlimited in this way, and in general of the unlimited, all the parts are mediate in the same way as up till now. So that if there is no primary thing, then in general there is no cause. So what he's saying is if there's an infinite regress, then you can't have a cause of the infinite regress, but everything needs a cause, so it's sort of like a reductio ad absurdum type situation. And indeed, we cannot even have the regress in the downward direction with the upper having the principle, so that water comes from fire and earth from this, And in the same way, something will always be generated. For one thing comes from another in two ways, either as a man comes by change from a child, or as air comes from water. For in the former way we say that the created arises from the creator, or the complete from the completer. For there is always a medium as the creation of being and not being. And so is the being to the becoming and not becoming. For the learner is the becoming knower, and this is the case of what is said, that the knower comes from the learner. But the second kind of change comes about with the destruction of the second thing. And so these changes are not bent back on to others, nor does a child come from a man. For the producer does not come about in production, but that which exists after the production. In this way, the day comes from the dawn, in that it is after it, and so the dawn does not come from the day. But the other kind of change does not bend back. But for either kind it is impossible to have an infinite regress, for of mediate entities there must be an end, while the mutual ones bend back, for the destruction of one is the generation of the other. To be honest, I don't really get this point. I get what he's saying, like some causal chains can only go one way. Um, and like therefore it can't like regress backwards sort of thing is what I'm getting at. Maybe, I'm not sure. At the same time, it is impossible that the primary existent being eternal should be destroyed, for since the upper creation is not limited, it is necessary that, since it is not itself eternal, it be generated from some non-destroyed primary thing. And since that for the sake of which is an end, it would be the sort of thing that would not be for other things, but rather other things for it, so that if there were to be some such final thing, there will not be a regress. But if there is no such thing, there will not be that for the sake of which. But those who posit the infinite will, without realizing it, have removed the nature of the good, and yet no one would have done anything with the intention to act, if that meant a regress. Nor would there be mind among the entities. For the thing that has mind is always acting for the sake of something. And this is a limit, for the end is a limit. And indeed, the essence cannot either be taken to another definition increasing by the account, for there will always rather be something ahead of it, and that which is second does not exist, and of that of which there is not a prior, there is also no sequential. All right, now we're in gobbledygook territory. Zam. Okay, let's try and break this down a bit. So first of all, we had this part which is arguing that an infinite regress sort of just isn't possible, because if there was, then it would there would be no cause for it, but if there was no cause for it, then there wouldn't be any sort of chain of causality to begin with. That's what I got from this one, right? Because if it's infinite, it need not a cause, but if it doesn't have a cause, then it doesn't exist. And indeed, we cannot even have the regress in the downward direction with the upper having the principle. So here he's saying, like, because of the fact that a lot of change is a one-way change, the regress would necessarily happen in a finite way, because you couldn't have things becoming something else eternally because they'd hit a brick wall, basically. And then what are we hearing here? It is impossible for the primary being to be destroyed, since upper creation is not limited, that it is necessary that if it is not, it is not a self-eternal to be generated from. I think what he's saying here is because he supposes that the starters of these causal chains is sort of an infinite self-sustained thing, that the causal chains couldn't be infinite, because if that were to be the case, then the creators of the causal chains would have to be finite, which would be a contradiction. That's my best attempt of what we're getting at here. So, yeah, let's continue, because I think that's what it means, but it's sort of really hard to like break this down because it's so wordy. No sequential. And this theory also gets rid of knowledge, for we cannot know before we reach the atoms, nor does cognition exist, for how is it possible to have cognition of such limitless things? For it is not the same with marks, which are not established by division, but we cannot know that which does not stand, which is why you cannot count an infinity of points. But it is also necessary to know the matter in something that is changing. And it is not possible for any infinite thing to exist, otherwise infinity would not be infinite. And indeed, if the forms of causes were limitless in number, not even so would cognition be possible. For we are thought to know when we have cognition of the causes, and the infinite by addition is not possible to go through in finite time. So here he's just saying all the things that wouldn't be possible, like morality, cognition, and other such things, if you had an infinite cause, but they do exist, so we have a finite cause. And the infinite by addition is not possible to go through finite time. Maybe. I've never thought about that. I've never thought, is it possible for an infinite thing to go through finite time? In this short chapter, Aristotle makes some pet points about method. Different types of study require different methodological approaches, but different methodical, oh my gosh, I can't speak English. But methodical preferences will also depend on the inclinations of the students. What is important is that the method for conducting any study is measured before the study is mastered before the study is attempted. True, it is not possible to learn the method and pursue the study at the same time. The best of all methods of study is that of mathematics, but this can only be used for things that do not undergo process of change. For natural things which do move and change, a less rigorous method than mathematics must be employed. Wait till they hear about calculus. I mean, calculus didn't exist yet, but as far as I understand it, it's like the mathematical study of change, and it's really, really, really freaking crazy. And our lectures on ethics are in accordance with this. For let us be prepared to speak in our accustomed manner. And the things in addition to these do not seem the same, but because of their unfamiliarity, they are less well known and stranger. For the well known is familiar, and the power of familiarity is shown by customs, in which mythical and childish factors, because of habit, have the same influence as knowledge about them. And some people will not accept a speech unless it is made in mathematical style, and others only if it does not use examples, and others demand that a poet be dragged in as a witness, and some say all things accurately, while others are offended by exactitude, either because they cannot grasp it or because of its brevity. That's so true. That is so true. Because people, I think, instinctively read between lines. So if you were to say something that might be factually true, but connected or adjacent to an idea that's offensive, people will assume you believe the offensive thing simply because you affirm something, right? Like if you, um, let me think. Uh, it's sort of like not a straw man, but I don't know what the right term is. It's like when you, I'm trying to think of a non-offensive way of doing this as well, which is just impossible. Like, for example, right, if you were to say, ah, no, I'm not even going to try. I'm just going to come across as the way I'm complaining about. But if you say something that's like typically offensive, um, it might be factually true, and specifically you might only be referring to like one thing. But because let's say someone who's racist or someone who's sexist or someone, here's one that I will actually say. Um, it is true, like statistically, that women have higher rates of neuroticism than men. That's just a psychological reality in gender difference, right? You know, when you look at holistically the population of women and the population of men, women are more neurotic on average. People might hear that and go like, "Oh wow, so you must be sexist." Well, no, I don't hate women. I don't dislike women at all. I like my girlfriend. But that has nothing to do, like my opinions on women have nothing to do with this statistical fact. But people will get offended by exactitude, right? Because you've said something specific, but they extrapolate to make it offensive. Anyway, let's actually continue reading. For accuracy has a feature like this, so that, as with agreements, so in arguments, it strikes some people as illiberal. And so one must be educated as to how each thing should be demonstrated, as it is absurd at the same time to seek a science and the style of a science, though not even the latter is easy to attain. And we should not seek mathematical exactitude in all things, but only for things that do not have matter. That is why this manner is not that of the natural scientist, since, I suppose, all nature has matter, and so we must first inquire what nature is, for we will thus make it clear what the subject matter of physics is. Book Beta. Alright, yeah, we're going to smash through Book Beta, I've decided. Book Beta is a collection of metaphysical problems. These 15 puzzles are developed in the course of the book, but no attempt is made to resolve them. The point of the book is to provide not answers but questions. The characteristic structure of the problems is that of a plausible seeming thesis and an equally plausible but contradictory antithesis. Usually the are thesis and antithesis are taken, one from the extreme naturalist or atomist, the other from the idealist, Pythagorean and Platonists. The purpose of the whole exercise is to illustrate the poverty of both at these extreme positions, so as to prepare the way for the exposition of Aristotle's own solution in the bulk of the work, which will in many respects be a compromise between materialism and idealism. The first chapter contains a list of the problems, which, however, does not exactly correspond to the order in which they are in fact presented in chapters 2 to 6, and some advisory remarks on how to read the problems. I will say this, like, Um, I think one of the things that drew me to Aristotle is the fact that I do see blatant problems with materialism as a whole, as a philosophy as a whole, and I do see blatant problems with idealism as a philosophy as a whole. So the fact that Aristotle hits that middle point is sort of what attracted me to reading it. Very talkative today, aren't I? I'm not very interested in just reading. All right, puzzle one. Let's go through the puzzles. There is a single science of the four causes or several such sciences. Thesis. There cannot be a single such science because the four kinds of causation are not contraries. It is only contraries that make up the domain of a single science. Antithesis. If there are several such sciences, then there can be no way of deciding which science is to be identified with first philosophy. Puzzle 2. Does the same science cover the study of the basic principles of logic and the study of substance? Thesis. The same science cannot study both logic and substance, because the principles of logic are common to all disciplines and cannot in any case be demonstrated, because they are self-evident and demonstration depends on them. Antithesis. On the other hand, if the science of logical axioms is different from that of substance, it is necessary to decide which has priority, a decision which must favor the universal logical principles, so that it will be they, not substance, that is the proper study of philosophy. Is there one or several sciences for these sensible and suprasensible substances? Thesis. If there are two sciences, one of the sensible and one for the suprasensible substances, we cannot give a principled decision as to which science is first philosophy. Antithesis. If there is a single science for both substances, how can it fail to turn out that there is really only one science of all things, whether sensible or suprasensible? Puzzle 4. Are all of these just going to be a distinction, and they're asking, I mean, it said it in the frickin' introduction thing. They're asking what the distinction is. They argue one side or the other of the distinction between sensible and not sensible, physical, not physical, whatever. And then they give like opposites. And then Aristotle's going to come in and be like, guys, why not both? Why not both? The science which studies substance, the same as that which also studies the properties of substance? Thesis. If it is the same, then since the science of the properties must be demonstrative, so must the science of substance itself. But substance is not something that can be demonstrated, but only defined. Antithesis. If it is not the same, the science that deals with the properties of substance, but not with the substance itself, will not be a science, because a science must deal with a subject and its properties. Puzzle 5. How many puzzles are there? Hey, yo! That is so many puzzles. Are there only sensible substances, or also suprasensible substances? And if the latter, are they only Platonic forms, or also the mathematical entities? Thesis. Both Platonic forms and mathematical entities are absurd. Platonic forms merely echo the sensible world without explaining it, and the mathematical entities, if they existed, would have to be paralleled by similar intermediate entities in the other sciences, and this would lead to an infinite regress in all cases. Antithesis. The mathematical sciences are evidently not based on sensible entities, so there must be mathematical entities in their case. However, it is not possible to consider such entities to be immanent in sensible entities themselves, on pain of having two entities with contrary properties in the same place at the same time. Puzzle 6. Are the principles of entities the material elements of which they are composed, or the genera to which they belong? Thesis. There are many examples of principles being taken to be the elements of which something is composed. For instance, the principles of words are their physical elements, and the principles in geometry are those propositions on which demonstration is based. Natural objects, too, are said by philosophers to have as their principles the natural elements of which they are made. And it is thought that we know, for instance, artifacts when we when we what, when we know their material components. Antithesis. But the principles are also taken to be the genera, because things are known by definitions of which the genera are principles, and also through their species, for which the genera are also principles. This perspective is, of course, supported by the teaching of Plato. If the genera are principles, it is the primary or the ultimate genera that are the principles. Is it the primary or ultimate genera that are the principles? Thesis. The primary genera cannot be the principles, because on this basis the principles would have to be the supreme genera of being and unity, which are not really genera at all. Also, all intermediate genera would have to count as principles, so that the principles of anything would have to be infinite in number. Thus the principles could only be the ultimate principles. Antithesis. But if the ultimate genera are principles, then the principle of a thing will not be external at all, but the principles must be external to what they are principles of, and so what is most a principle must be most external, so that it should be the primary, not the ultimate genera that are principles. Puzzle 8. Is there something over and above particular individuals? Thesis. If there is nothing but an infinity of particulars, then science is impossible. It would also, in such circumstances, be impossible for there to be anything that was immune to process. But since things subject to process depend on at least one thing that is not subject to process, this would mean that things subject to process did not exist either. Antithesis. But if there is something over and above particulars, must there or must there not be one such thing for each sensible particular? This question cannot be given a principled answer, but in any case there is a dilemma. If there is only one universal object, then everything will share the same form, whereas if there are several, there will be many identical forms of substance. Puzzle 9. Do principles have formal or numerical unity? Thesis. If principles have only formal and not numerical unity, then no entities can have numerical unity either, not even one and being. And also science, which depends upon something which is numerical as well as formally a unity uniting particulars, will be impossible. Antithesis. But if the unity of principles is numerical, then there will again be as many entities as there are principles, so that there will turn out to be far too few particular entities. Puzzle 10. Are the principles of perishable and imperishable things the same or different? Thesis. If they are the same, how can some of the things of which they are principles be imperishable, while others are perishable? Antithesis. If, on the other hand, they are different, there is a dilemma about the principles of perishable things. Are these principles themselves perishable? If they are, then either they will have to have further principles of principles, which is absurd, for all perishable things will at some point cease to be produced. But if they are not, we have the problem that form the same imperishable principles, both imperishable and perishable things are derived from the same imperishable principles. That was a bit of a brain fart moment. But we almost are at freaking book thingy. Puzzle 11. Are one and being per se substances, or are they predictable of other things? Thesis. If one and being are not substances, then neither will other universals be, nor will number be a per se substance. Antithesis. If one and being are substances, then everything will have to be one and being, and Parmenides will be right. Also, number will be impossible because number requires a plurality of units, which is incompatible with one being a substance. Multiplicity cannot be derived from a necessarily single thing. Are numbers bodies, surfaces, and points substances, or not? Thesis. What else could be? Affections, relations, movement, etc. cannot be substances because they are predictable, nor can the elements and their affections be determinate substances. So only body can be substance, and body is determined by surface, which is in turn determined by line, and this by point. So if what determines something is its substance, points would seem to be the substance most of all. And it was on this basis that the Platonists and Pythagoreans suggested that numbers were basic substances. Antithesis. On the other hand, if points, lines, and surfaces are more substantial than bodies, they cannot be insensible bodies, whereas in fact it is usually thought that points, lines, and surfaces are not substances but divisions of bodies, being present not actually but potentially in them. Puzzle 13. Is it necessary to allow forms in addition to sensible entities and intermediate entities? Thesis. The intermediate entities are not numerically determinate, so that their principles are also not numerically determinate. But it must be the case that their principles are both formally and numerically determinate. Only the admission of forms can ensure this. Hey, I'm back. Cool. Yeah, I'm gonna. I kind of want to play some lo-fi, so that way my headphones don't come like 2 centimeters of rain ahead. Wow. I don't want my headphones to like just destroy themselves by turning on and off again. It's really hurting my ears. All right, let's get some lo-fi for streaming. I don't even know if Twitch safe lo-fi. Here we go.
It's 9:15. How am I already underwater?
I'm in the same boat.
I'm in an actual boat.
I thought.
Alrighty. Here we go. Now I can talk as much as I want and my headphones won't destroy themselves. But this leads to the difficulty produced in Puzzle 9. Yeah, okay. Puzzle 14. Do the principles have being in potentiality or in actuality? Thesis. If they have being in actuality, there must be something prior to the principles, namely their potentiality, since potentiality precedes actuality. Antithesis. But if the principles have being in potentiality, everything which is could not be, since what is not yet also has being in potentiality. Are the principles universal or particular? Thesis: if they are universals, they cannot be substances on plain Platonism. Antithesis: but if they are particulars, they cannot fall in the domain of a science which always studies universals. There would then absurdly have to be principles of principles for science to study. Right. You know, the thing is, I hate being like a centrist goober, but both sides have a good point. They both have a good point. You know, it can't just be particulars, but it can't just be universals. Because, sorry, I'm having my coffee. Because if it is just particulars, then there's nothing to discern. But if it's just universals, then there's nothing to make a universal, basically. Alright, now we get on to beta 1. So this is going to go through what we just covered, all these questions, but in, I'm guessing, more flowery and elaborate detail, so that we can amuse ourselves with brain fart words. Alright, here we go. It is necessary with regard to the science that we are seeking that we should first address those puzzles that first arise. And these are those which others have supposed to be different about these same things. And also anything in addition to these that we may happen to have left out. For those who wish to make good progress must start well. For subsequent progress depends on the resolution of the first puzzles, and one cannot solve these without knowing the difficulty, and the confusion of our minds shows this to be the case with the matter. For in any way in which it is puzzled, in that way it undergoes something like what happens to prisoners. For it is impossible for either of them to move forward. So we must first set out all the difficulties, both for these reasons and also because those who inquire without first setting out the difficulties are like those who do not know in which direction they should walk, and in addition do not even know whether they should recognize that which they are looking for. For the end is not clear to these, but it is for those who have begun with the puzzles. And also from the point of view of judging that man must be better off who has heard, as it were, all the rival and opposed positions. Yeah, I would agree. I mean, not even just in the case of philosophy and these particular subjects, but in life. If you want to be a well-rounded person in terms of knowledge, especially of things like politics and philosophy and ethics and whatever, you should be able to fully comprehend all sides of the argument and know the problems of all positions, right? Because if you don't know the problems of the position you hold, but you still affirm it, then you're sort of walking blind. Yeah, I would agree. And in a way, philosophy is really the study of it's a problem-solving issue, like science, right? You're trying to figure out how to make sense of things in a way that's internally coherent. Alright, let's continue. Now, the first puzzle is that which we raised in our preliminary remarks, whether it belongs to one or to many sciences, to consider the principles, and whether it is for the science only to see the primary principles of the substances, or whether all thinkers should, in the way in which we can say that one thing is both the same and not the same, on the basis of what they have shown, also make demonstrations about the subsequent points, and also, if it concerns substance, whether it is about one or many, and if there are many, then whether they have affinities, or rather we should call some of them wisdoms and some by some other name. And this is another thing that is necessary to seek, whether we should say that only the sensible substances exist, or others also in addition to these, and whether in a single way, or various kinds of the substances. As with those who posit the forms and the mathematical entities mediate between them and the sensibles. As with those who posit the forms and mathematical entities mediate between them and the sensibles. Concerning these things, then, as we say, we must consider, and also whether the theory is only about substances or also about the intrinsically accidental properties of substances. And also we must think about the sameness and difference and similarity and dissimilarity and opposition about prior and posterior and all other things, about which dialecticians try to consider, basing their inquiry solely on the received opinions, to whom it does belong to consider all things. And also the intrinsic properties of these things do not only whether they are those called final and first for the individuals, such as whether animal or man is a principle and exists rather than the individual. But we must especially inquire and investigate whether there is any cause beyond matter in itself or not, and whether this is separable or not, and whether it is one or many in number, and whether there is anything beyond the whole, by which I mean when something is predicated of the matter, or nothing, or in some cases yes, and in some cases no, and of what kind such of the entities are, and also whether the principles are defined by number or by form, both those in accounts and those in subjects, and whether they are the same or different for both perishable and imperishable substances, and whether they are all imperishable, for those of perishable substances are perishable, and also that which has the greatest difficulty of all, whether the one and the existent, as the Pythagoreans and Plato said, is not something else but a substance of the entities, or not, but something else is the substrate, in the way that Empedocles says that it is love, and some others say fire or water or air. Would Kant say, correct me if I'm wrong, but would Kant say consciousness would be the substance of all entities? I don't know Kant, so I don't know German idealism, but I'm pretty sure that's the position Kant holds. Correct me if I'm wrong, chat. Just kidding, nobody's watching this. Boo hoo hoo. And whether the principles are general or like particulars, and whether in potentiality or actuality, and whether in other ways or by movement, for these things might also provide considerable puzzlement, and also whether the numbers and lengths and shapes and points are kinds of substances or not, and whether the substances would be separated from the sensibles or indwelling in them. For about all these things it is not only hard to reach the truth, but not even easy to come up with a sensible account. That is true. Philosophy is hard. Oh, alrighty. 10 more pages to go, gang. Or more like 20, right? Yeah, more like 20, yeah. Alrighty. First, let us deal then with the problems that we first mentioned, whether it belongs to one or to many sciences to consider all the kinds of causes. For how could a single science grasp them, given that the principles are not opposites, and also many entities do not have all features? For in what way can there be a principle of change in things that are unchanged? For the nature of good, if indeed everything that might be good in itself and through its own nature is an end, and in this way a cause, in that it is for the sake of it that other things both come into being and exist. Well, like, that's one thing which I don't like about philosophy, is it's so hard to explain what you're talking about. What I'm getting from this thing about the good is like, for in what way can a principle change? If something's good in and of itself, then its goodness is essential to its being, and therefore its being can't change, because then it would cease to be good, and good is the cause of the being, so how would the being change? That's sort of what I'm getting from this question. And the end for the sake of which are the end of some action, and all actions involve movement. So it would be impossible for this principle to be in the things that are not moved, nor for anything to be good in itself. Right. And that is why nothing in mathematics is shown in this way, nor is there any proof which rests on something's being better or worse. And in fact, nobody makes mention of any such things at all. So that, for this reason, some of the sophists, such as Aristippus, have rejected them entirely. For in other skills, even the Benorsic, not operating on an elevator level mundane.
Benorsic.
Word of the day right there, Benorsic. Even Benorsic ones, such as building and cobbling, since all things are said to be better or worse, done, but no one gives such an account of mathematics concerning good or bad states. But indeed, if there are several sciences of the causes, and different ones for different principles, which of these would we assert to be the one that we are looking for? Or would we say to be especially knowledgeable of the affair that we are investigating, of those which have them? My guess would be that it's the cause that explains. It would be a system of study that explains the several sciences, that justifies the several sciences. So it'd be a science prior to the it would be a meta-science, is what I would say, personally. Because like that's what philosophy is in a way, right? It's meta-science. Because science is the study, well, science is what Aristotle would call natural science, but our science is Aristotle's natural science. But anyway, in order to believe in science, you have to believe in certain things as being true and justified. You have to believe that, for example, the earth is ordered, or reality is ordered, things are like the past exists, the world is not only real, but also comprehensible. Like, so for example, if you philosophically believe that there's no such thing as the world, everything's an illusion, then there's no point studying science, because none of it's real. It's the equivalent of magic, right? And if you presuppose that nothing is the same ever, right? Things aren't like the past, then you can't study some sort of scientific principle, because science requires repetition in order for something to be verified as true and correct. So I'm guessing my answer to this is probably a meta-science, a meta-philosophy that can answer a meta-science that will answer the several sciences. For it is possible for the same man to know all the ways of the causes, such as for a house, that from which is the movement is the skill and the builder, and for that which is the function, and the matter is earth and the stones, and the form is the account. From the things then that we have long ago defined, which should we call wisdom, or should we do so of them all? For to the extent that a science is more directive and hegemonic, and to the extent that it is not right for the other sciences to contradict it any more than slaves might, the science of the end and of the good is of this kind, for it is for this that the others exist. But to the extent that it has been defined to be of the primary causes and of the most knowable thing, that sort of science would be the science of substance. For though they often know the same thing, we say rather that he who knows the essence really knows the thing as to what it is, and by knowing what it is not, and of these one more than another. And especially the man who knows the what it is and not, and how much or of what kind, or what it naturally does or undergoes. And in all other subjects we think that that man knows on each occasion, and we think that he has knowledge when we know what the thing is. For example, what is squaring, the discovery of the median, and so with the others. Whereas about its coming into being and its doings, and about all its alteration, we think that we have knowledge when we know the source of its movement. And this is the opposite and set against the end, so that it would seem to belong to another science to survey each of these two causes. I'm starting to read, it's starting to make sense, his writing style, I mean. It's starting to read easier the more I read this. And indeed, in connection with the demonstrative principles, whether they belong to one science or to many, there is controversy. And by demonstrative, I mean those common opinions from which they demonstrate everything else. For instance, it is necessary that everything be either asserted or denied, that it is impossible for something both to be and not to be, and all other such premises. Whether there is one single science of these and of substances, or another, and if there should be one, how we should describe that which we are currently seeking. Well, it is not reasonable that there should be one, for how could one claim any resemblance between this science and, say, geometry? If then it is the same with absolutely any science, then it cannot be so for all of them. Just as it does not belong to the others, nor to that which scrutinizes substance to have knowledge about these. And again, in what way will it be a science of them? For what each of these things happens to be, we already know. Indeed, other skills make us of them as already known. For it is necessary that a demonstration must have some fundamental premises, so that the result is that there is one single kind of all these things, since all demonstrative sciences use axioms. And indeed, if there is a different science for these and for substances, which of them is prior and master? For the axioms are rather the more general and the principles of all things. If this does not belong to the philosopher, who else will have the job of considering truth and falsity in their case? And in general, is there some one single science of all substance, or many? And if there is not one, of what sort of substance should we suppose that one to be? It is not reasonable that there should be one for all substances, for then it would also be one science that would be demonstrative about all accidents, if all demonstrative science considers some substrate and the things happening to it from the received opinions. And it surely belongs to the same science to consider the accidental properties of what is subject from the same opinions. For there is a single science of the what and the of the whence, of the what and of the whence. either the same or some other, so that either these same ones or some of them will also consider the accidents. And whether the theory is only concerned with substances or also with their accidents. I mean, for instance, if the solid is a kind of substance, and so the line and plane, whether it belongs to the same science to know all these things and the accidents for each kind, about which mathematics makes demonstrations, or some other. For if it is the same one, then the science of substance would also be demonstrative. But there does not seem to be a demonstration of what it is. But if it belongs to some other science, which science will it be that considers the accidents for a substance? For this would be very hard to deliver. What I'm getting at from all this, just to like take a second to digest what's being said, I think what he's getting at is basically this prior, or not a prior science, but it's the questions that we saw raised earlier, where if you have a science that is a sort of singular science for all, it wouldn't be able to explain all the substances and accidents of reality, because it would be general, and different things are justified in different ways. You know, for example, numbers don't physically exist, so you don't need physical evidence for them, but say proving that you know, the speed of gravity, for example, like the rate of acceleration that things fall at, was it 9 point something something meters per second is the acceleration. Well, if that's the case, then you run into the same issue where that one would need physical proof. That would need you to actually go out and test it. But then you would have two different sciences, right? Because one is justified differently to the other. So they can't be one science. They would have to be multiple sciences. But then what makes them all sciences? You know? That's sort of what I'm getting at here. I could be completely wrong, but we'll see. Or should we say that there are only the sensible sciences, or others also besides these? And do there happen to be manifold or only single kinds of entities, such as with those who posit the forms and the intermediates, concerning which we assert the mathematical sciences to be? As we say, then, the forms are said to be causes and substances in themselves, in the first book about them. But in many ways they present difficulties, none less than the absurdity of saying that there are some natures in addition to those in the heaven, and to say that there are these same ones for the sensibles, except that some are eternal and some perishable. For we say that there is the form of man and also of horse and health, but nothing else, making the same sort of mistake as those who say that there are gods, but that they are in the form of men. For they are doing nothing else than positing eternal men, and these thinkers are not positing forms, but eternal sensibles. And if one posits in addition to the sensibles and the forms and the immediate entities, then there will be many absurdities. So here he's refuting this idea that like you can have sort of eternal sensible forms. That's what I'm getting at here, and he's making the example of people who think that the gods are physical men. For it is obvious how lines will be in regard to themselves and to the perceptible ones, and so with each of the other kinds, so that, given that astrology is the single science of these things, there will be some heaven in addition to the sensible heaven, and sun and moon and all other things in the heaven. And yet, how should one believe in such things? For it is not even reasonable that they should be unmoved, but since they are moved, it is completely impossible. The same goes for those things studied by optics and mathematical harmonics. For it is impossible that these should exist in addition to the sensibles for the same reasons. For if there are mediate sensibles and sensations, it is obvious that there will also be mediate animals between them and the perishable ones. And one might have the problem about which entities one should seek in such sciences. For if geometry will discern the geodesies, I've never heard this word before. Geodesy, the shortest path between 2 points on a surface or in a manifold. Huh. What? What is this? Oh, this is geometry gobbledygook. Wow. This is crazy. If I'm looking at this correctly, is this like an L shape when mapped onto a sphere becomes like a straight line or something? Am I crazy? Is that what I'm seeing? I don't know. I mean, it makes sense, like just studying the shortest line between 2 points, which would be this. Anyway, let's continue. If geometry will discern the geodesies, how do you say this word? Geodesics? In this way only, in that one is of the things that we perceive, while the other is of those that we do not, it is obvious that in addition to medicine, there will be some other science with all the others the same, between medicine itself and the medicine of everyday experience. And yet, how is that possible? Okay, so this is sort of like going into how meta a science can be, if I'm getting this correct. Like, for things that are sensible, you can't have this sort of dualistic view of the science, because otherwise you which is what we were saying, what he was saying before, right? Like, you can't have something be like a science of science and also a science of a particular science and also be a science of a particular thing, like the science of medicine and then the science of medicine itself versus medicine as practiced. For there would then also be certain healthy things between the healthy itself and the perceived healthies. Alright. And yet this is not true either, that the geodesic is of perceived and perishable magnitudes, for it would have been destroyed when they are, and similar to astrology would turn out not to be about the perceived sizes and then observed heaven, for perceived lines are not the same kind as the geometer pronounces. For one of the sensibles is in this way straight or curved, for the circle does not touch the ruler at a point. Protagoras said in his criticism of the geometers, nor are the movements and rotations of the heavens such as those with which astrology deals, nor do the signs have the same natures as the stars. But there are some who say that there are so-called intermediate entities between the forms and the sensibles, but not separate from the sensibles, but in them. And the absurd consequences of this would take a long argument to reveal, and it is sufficient to consider such things, for it would not be reasonable to say this much only in this case, but it is clear that the forms would also have to be in the sensibles, for they both have the same account, so that there would also have to be two bodies in the same place, and the forms could not be changeless if they were in changing things. And anyway, why should one suppose that there are such things but that they are in the sensibles. For the same absurdities will follow as above, if there will be a heaven in addition to the heaven, except that it will not be separate, but in the same place, which is still more impossible. So here he's saying, like, you can't have these Platonic eternal forms exist in the things themselves, as far as I can ascertain, because then that would bring about the contradiction of putting sort of an eternal thing inside of a not eternal thing, right? Which is weird, because, like, I wonder what, I really do want to read Diameter now, because as far as I know, Aristotle holds that the soul, which is the form of man, is eternal, I think. But if that's the case, he's going to have a weird time arguing that, right? So he will have, because then there will be an eternal form that is in the form of a perishable man, but, like, I don't know how you're going to argue that, you know what I mean? Excuse me, I'm just guzzling coffee. I'm like the Tin Man from not Alice in Wonderland. What's that? The Yellow Brick Road. Where there's the lion, the Tin Man, and the Wizard of Oz. I'm like the Tin Man from the Wizard of Oz, where I just need to be oiled up, except it's with coffee, not oil. I think over the uni break, I'm gonna try and, like, heavily reduce, maybe even quit coffee for a bit. Get off caffeine, so that way I can just, like, cope better with life without having to, like, constantly guzzle coffee. But we'll see how we go. Beta 3. So there's not beta 4. There's not many betas. Concerned with these matters, there is great uncertainty as to which positions are likely to be conducive to truth, and in connection with the principles, whether it is right to suppose that the kinds are the elements and principles, or rather the primary things from which each thing is, as the elements and principles of voice are thought to be the things from which primary voices are made, but not the common thing, voice. And we say that those things are elements of diagrams, of which the demonstrations are present in the demonstrations of either all or most other things, even of bodies like the pluralists think that there are elements, and so do the monists, as Empedocles says that fire and water and so forth are the elements from which entities are constructed, but he does not mention these things as types of entity. And in addition to these, if anyone else wanted to conjecture a nature such as that of a bed, saying from what part it was constructed and how put together, then we will know its nature. On these grounds, the principles would not be the kinds of entities, and if we know each thing by definitions, and the principles are the kinds of definitions, it is necessary that the kinds are the principles of defined things. And if it is possible to grasp the science of entities, and also grasp the science of forms by which they say that things exist, then the kinds will be the principles of the forms. And it seems that some also of those who say that the elements of entities are the one, or the being, or the great, and the small are using them as creations. I think what he's saying here is basically that he's trying to get at what something is still. This is basically what the whole point of Gamma has been so far, is to really get at what something is. And it seems to me that what he's arguing is that the kinds, or it feels like kinds is more of a term than it is actually how we use it in English. Man, I wish I knew Greek. It would be a lot easier to do this if I knew Greek. On these principles, I feel like what he's trying to get at what it means for something to be a thing and how you would define it without being in contradiction with reality or truth. And the sort of issue is here, well, if you define it based off an abstract definition of the principles that make it up, then that abstract principle, those sets of abstract principles would be the form of that thing. And then what makes a thing would be its form. And then it seems that those elements that can come together to make the form are creations? I don't know. That's sort of what I'm getting at. I might be completely wrong. But in neither way can we speak of the principles. For the account of substance is one, and another will be that of definition by kind, and that which gives the constituents. In addition, even if the kinds are as much principles as you like, you should think that the primary kinds are principles, or the ultimate ones categorized of individuals, for this too is controversial. So now he's saying, yeah, but, well, it actually could just be that, in order for something to be a substance, in order for something to be that sort of essence, it needs to have oneness, But then, and the primary kinds, the primary essences, are of a nature of oneness. And then he's saying, yeah, but this is also a controversial position. So he's still going through all the problems, and he's just laying them out. And yeah, it's very hard to read. This is probably one of the hardest books I've read this year, in terms of actually comprehending what I'm reading. I thought English class in high school would have prepared me for this, but no, it did not. For if it is always the universals that are rather principles, it is clear that they will be the highest of kinds, for these are said of all things. There will then be as many principles of entities as there are primary kinds, so that one and being will be principles and substances. For these things are said of the largest number of things, but it is not possible that there be one kind of things, either the one or the being. Now he's saying if it's based off of oneness, but if it is oneness, then every individual thing will be its own entity in a way that sort of makes it hard for things to be put together. You know what I mean? It would be too primary, is what I'm getting at here. It's not possible that there be one kind of things, either the one or the being, for it is necessary that the differentiae of each kind both are and are each single, and it is impossible either to predicate the species of the genus with their own differentiae, or the genus without its own species. So that if the one or being were a kind, then neither being nor the one would be a differentia. But if there are no kinds, then there will not be any principles either. Yeah. But if the kinds are principles, and the mediates included with the differentiae will be kinds down to the individuals. Yes, now it's going back to this whole thing where it's like, sort of, if you make it too broad, then you can't actually discern or attach any individual property to any individual thing, right? Because if it's too abstract, then too broad, then you sort of like can't say a cup's a cup. It's just an individual, because there's no relation to the cup and to the essence of cupness, right? There's no relation there. But if you boil it down too much to individuation, then cups, all cups, there's nothing that makes one cup the same as another cup, because they're all based off their own individuality. So there's nothing to make them the same. That's basically the gist of what I'm getting at with these problems. It's like, you make it too broad, it's a problem. You make it too narrow, it's a problem. You have to find a way of defining the essence of a thing that isn't that allows for you to generalize enough so that the essence of something can be described while allowing for variation within it, but also allowing for you to be able to differentiate that genus from other things, right? That's sort of what I'm getting at here. That's what I feel like it's getting at. This is the problem. This is the core of the issue. If it's too divided, then it's a problem. If it's too individuated, if it's too divided, then it's a problem. If it's too universal, then it's a problem. Because things have individuation, and for that reason, you need to find a way to discern between different things. But if it's too broad, then it's you get what I'm saying. You get what I'm saying. 0 viewers. Whereas some are thought, some are not. And furthermore, the differentiae are still more principles than the kinds. And if these are principles, then there will be an infinity of principles, so to speak. Especially if one were to make the primary kind a principle. But indeed, even if the one is more like a principle and the one is undivided, then the whole universe will be undivided either in quantity or in form, so that the one would be more like the last, predictable. For man is not the kind of certain men, and in things for which the prior and posterior arise, it is not possible that in this case there should be anything beyond them. If the dyad is the first of numbers, then there will be no number beyond the forms of numbers, and similarly no shapes beyond the form of shape. And if it is not of these, then it is unlikely that there will be principles of other entities except for the forms. For of them they especially seem to be kinds. But in individuals there is no prior and posterior, but wherever there is better and worse, there always the better is prior, so that of these two there would not be a genus. From all this it rather appears that the things predicated of individuals are rather the principles than the kinds. But again, it is not easy to say how we should take these to be the principles, for the principle and cause should exist beside the thing of which they are, and should be separable from them. And why should one assume this of individual properties, except in that they are universally predicated for all things? But if this is the reason, we should consider more universal things rather to be principles, so that the principles would be primary kinds. There is a puzzle connected with these, which is the hardest and yet most necessary to consider of all. Oh my gosh, it's going to get harder. And concerning it, we have so far given no account. For either there is nothing else besides individuals, the individuals are limitless, then how is it possible to have a science of infinity? For, in so far as it is one and the same thing, and insofar as it has some general property, to the extent it is possible to know all things. But if indeed this is necessary, and there must be something in addition to the individuals, then these will either be the ultimates or the primaries. And we have just shown that it is impossible. And if there is, as much as you like, something other than the whole, whenever something is predicated of matter, if there is something, should it be something beyond everything else, or be beyond some things but not beyond others, or beyond nothing? If then there is nothing beyond the individuals, then there would be nothing intelligible, but all things would be sensible, and there would be science of nothing, unless one were to say that perception was a science. And also there would be nothing that was eternal and unmoved, for all sensibles are perishable and in motion. But if there is nothing eternal, then there cannot be generation. For there must be something that is generated and something from which it is generated, and the last of this series must be ungenerated. If it comes to an end, it is impossible that there should be generation from what is not. Yeah, something can't come from nothing. And since there is generation and change, there must also be limit, for no movement is unlimited, and of all movement there is an end, and that which cannot become cannot be created. And the becoming must have been when it first became. And again, if matter exists through being ungenerated, then it is all the more reasonable that substance can be. Whenever matter is generated, for if one is not, then neither will the other be, and there will be nothing at all. But if this is impossible, then there must be something besides the whole, the shape, namely, and the form. And again, if someone should suppose this, then will produce puzzles in some cases, and in some cases not, for it is clear that it cannot be so in all cases. For we would not suppose that there might be some house in addition to particular houses. Furthermore, is there one substance for all things, such as for all men? But this is absurd, for all things are one, of which the substance is one. But can they be many and different? This too is unreasonable. But how will the matter for each of these things come about, and is the whole both of these things? And one might also raise the following problem about the principles. If they are one in form, then there will be nothing one in number, not even the one itself and being. And indeed it will be possible to know in a way. If there is not the one over many, but if each of the principles is one in number, and not as with the sensibles, but for the others, as with such and such syllable being one in form, then the principles will be one in form, for these are several in number. But if this is not so, and the principles of the entities are one in number, then nothing else will exist apart from the elements. For it makes no difference whether we speak of the particular or the one in number. For by the one in number we mean the particular, and by the general we mean what is above them. So that if the elements of voice were defined in number, then it would be necessary that all the lines were as numerous as the elements, there not being two or more the same. This little bit here, I'm sort of blanked out a bit there. I like woke up and I was still reading. This bit here at least seems to be sort of a refutation of Pythagoras' position, right? That like, you know, the universals are numerical in nature, because then if it's numerical, then you would have to have a number for everything, basically. But that's not the case. I don't know. I'm sort of, my brain's starting to like melt a bit, and we still got 10 pages to go. Yeah, but we can do it. We can do it, gang. But a no less grave puzzle remains both for the present theorists and for the previous ones, whether there are the same principles for the perishable as for the imperishable substances or different ones. Now, if there are the same. See, this is just bad writing. If there are the same, why not just say if they are the same? That is grammatically correct. This is just grammatically incorrect. If there are the same, if they are the same. How is it that some things are perishable and others imperishable, and of what cause? Now those of the school of Hesiod, and of all those as theologians, only considered what is plausible in connection, and made little of us, for by making the gods the principles, and by making creation from the gods, they say that those who do not eat the nectar and ambrosia are born mortal, clearly mentioning names that are known to them, and yet we have ourselves spoken about such provision of causes. For if they address them for the sake of pleasure, then the nectar and ambrosia are not at all the cause of their being. And if they are the cause of their being, then how could they be eternal if they need food? Yeah, good point. But about those who have invented clever mythologies, it is not worthwhile to take a serious look. I would say that's fair enough. I mean, even as a religious person myself, like, there are some things you can't use I'm a Christian. You can't use the Bible to answer everything. You cannot use the Bible to answer the problem of universals and particulars. There's like a place for spirituality and there's a place for philosophy, and they're not the same place, you know. And not to say that they can't be in synergy. I believe they absolutely can be in synergy. Same with science and religion. But, you know, you can't use faith to replace things like philosophy and reason and science. It just doesn't work. I mean, it does for some, but it just ends up being like really circular. And also, here's something: if you are not religious or religious, don't use your religious position as a justification for your beliefs. It just never works. Okay, you're never going to change anyone's mind doing that. Like, if you're religious, don't say, well, the Bible says this, that's why I believe that. Actually use reason to answer your position. And if someone's not religious, don't say, well, God doesn't exist, so blah 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 blah, or like, you know, that's a made up fairy tale. You have to argue from the point of reason. Unless you've watched my video on crowd psychology, or my review of The Crowd by Gustave Le Bon, then you might think maybe just basically brainwashing people is better. But of those who speak by demonstration, we are entitled to demand an answer to the question, why needed things coming from the same source are in some cases in nature and others are destroyed. But since they neither gave reason nor is it reasonable that they should be so, it is clear that they are not the same principles nor causes for them. This guy needs to get his grammar sorted, because there is not the right word. And indeed, the one whom one might most reasonably ascribe this opinion, Empedocles, even he suffered the same thing, for he supposed a certain principle that was responsible for the destruction in strife, but he seemed no less to generate this from the one. For everything else is from this, except God. Indeed, he says, from which all things that were and are, trees flourished forth, and men and women both, and ominous birds and water nourished fish, and indeed long-yeared gods. And it is clear that even without these lines, for if they were not present affairs, then all things would be one, as he puts it, for when they came together then lastmost was strife. And so it happens for him that the most blessed God is of the least wise of them all, for he does not know all things, for he does not have strife, and cognition is of like by like. For earth by earth, he says, we see water by water, and noble air by air, love by love, and strife by bitter strife. But from where the ratio comes, this clear. From where the ratio comes, this clear it comes about that for him strife. This is not English. Am I crazy? Am I reading this wrong? Maybe I'm just tired, but this does not seem like English to me. Strife is no more the cause of destruction than being is, and in the same way neither is love the cause of being. For by drawing things to one it destroys other things, and at the same time he gives no cause for this change except that they are so constituted. But when great strife was swollen in its limbs, to honour them in fullest time it came, which spins about its centre like an oath. The assumption is that it changes out of necessity, but he reveals not cause for the entity. No cause for the but he reveals not cause for the necessity. No cause for the necessity, I think, is probably better there. And yet this is as much as he says in agreement, for he does not make some things perishable and other things imperishable, but all things perishable except the elements. But the present puzzle is why some things are perishable and some not, if they are from the same principles. Yeah, so if everything's made out of imperishable things, then if you're essentially constituted by something imperishable, reasonably you would assume that you would then not be perishable. But things do perish, right? Which is sort of weird, because on another way of looking at it, matter can't be created or destroyed, right? Although I think that's not kind of not true, because I think you can turn energy into matter and matter into energy. Either way, allegedly, matter can't be created or destroyed according to what's it, the law of conservation of mass or whatever. And if that's the case, well, that's sort of awkward, because humans can be created and destroyed, but we're sort of more apparently created and destroyed, aren't we? Because it's not that we are destroyed, it's not like the stuff on us disappears, it's just that we change composition, and we sort of, the matter on us is moved or rearranged elsewhere to give the appearance of being destroyed. That then, there is not the same principles, so much let it be said, but if the principles are different, then one puzzle is whether they themselves will be perishable or imperishable. Now if they are perishable, then it is clear that they too must come from other principles, for everything is destroyed to that from which it comes, so that it turns out that some other principles are prior to the principles, and this is impossible, both if it ends and if there is a regress. And how will perishable things be if their principles are removed? But if they are imperishable, how is it that from imperishable things, perishable things should come? But from other principles, imperishable things. For this does not make sense, but it is either impossible or requires extensive discussion. And again, no one has tried to suggest other ones, but they say that there are the same principles for all things, that they are the same principles for all things. Stop using there, please. And the first puzzle they brush aside as though assuming it is trivial. That annoys me when people do that. a lot. It happens a lot when you question morality among people. It's like, well, obviously murder is bad. My justification for why murder is bad makes no sense, but obviously it's bad. Huh. Anyway, and also, most hard to consider, but most necessary for knowledge, is the question whether being and the one are substances of entities, with each of them not being some other thing, while the one is the one and being. For whether we have to ask what the one is and being with some other nature as substrate. For some think that nature is in one way and some in another. Well, Plato and the Pythagoreans think that the one and being are not different in nature, but the same, since substance is the same to be one and to be being. But the students of nature, such as Empedocles, make the whole point more familiar by saying that the one is, for he would seem to be saying that love is some such thing, for it is the cause of everything's being one, whereas the others cite fire or air as the one and being, from which come the things that are. Okay, now we're on to a different problem. So we're just still going through all the problems that have to be dealt with in philosophy, the things become. And in the same way, those who posit a plurality of elements, for it is necessary that these should also say that the one and being are as many as they assert there to be principles. And the result is that if one supposes there to be some substance, the one and being, then there will not be any other things, for these are the most general of all things. But if there is one itself, or being itself, then it is hardly like to be one of the others, except for the individuals that have been mentioned. Yeah, this is the problem, right? That if being is of oneness, then any being that is separate from this oneness is not being and oneness. So you can't have a plurality, but presumably a plurality of things have being and oneness and substance. So it's like a type of situation. But there is something that is both one and being, right? Which would be, I'm guessing, but if there is something that is both one and being, then it is necessary that its substance be the one and being, for it will not be some other thing predicated of it, but these very things. That is, as far as I can understand, the Western tradition's definition of God. Something that is being and one, and is not predicated on anything else. It is self-sufficient, it is self-sustaining. But indeed, if unity itself and being itself exist, then there is a great puzzle how there will be anything apart from them. That is true. I think the Eastern Orthodox answer to this is very weird, which is that reality is sort of a product of the mind of God, which is like a really weird take, you know? It's called like divine conceptualism, I think. Yeah, see, I've already searched it up. We're going to Oxford. Take me to my content. Oxford Academic. Divine Conceptualism. William Lane Craig. Abstract another version of realism about mathematical objects. Is considered divine conceptualism. The view that objects normally taken to be abstract are actually thoughts in the mind of God. Whether conceptualism solves the challenge of divine aesthety, self-existence, existing of oneself, is unclear, since God's thoughts seem to be objects not identical to God, and must therefore be regarded as created by God, in which case the bootstrapping objection dogging absolute creationism rears its ugly head. Bootstrapping objection rears its ugly head. What does bootstrapping mean in this case? This is clearly a rabbit hole that is not worth the time of going down. Let's just get back to the book. Let's just get back to the book, guys. By which I mean how entities will be more than one, for there is no other to being, so that, as Parmenides said, it is necessary that all things are one, and that this is being. But on the other way of thinking, it is difficult. For if the one is not a substance, or if the one itself exists, it is impossible that number should be a substance. But if it should not be, we have said above why not, and if it is, then the same puzzle arises in connection with being. For from what other unity will this other unity arise? Yeah, so this is the same issue, right? If something's sort of like being in and of itself, if it's like that self-sustaining oneness, it sort of doesn't make sense for other things to come out of it, because then there would be other things besides the being, or something. I don't know. For it is necessary that it is not one or many things of which each is one. Again, if the one itself cannot be divided, then by Zeno's reasoning, nothing would exist. For that which neither by adding nor by subtracting makes either larger or smaller, one does not say this is one of the entities, but on the obvious assumption that an entity must have magnitude. And if it must have magnitude, then it must be bodily, for that is something that is in all ways. And other things do, in a way, make something larger by their addition, but in a way that they do not, such as the plane and the line, but the point and the monad not at all. But since Zeno reasoned wrongly, and it is possible to have something that is indivisible, so must we answer this paradox. For such a thing being added will not make something bigger. For such a thing being added will not make something bigger. But how from such a thing, or from many such things, will magnitude arise? For it is the same as saying that the line is a collection of points, and indeed, if one so supposed it so, it would be generated, as some say, from the one itself and something else that is not one in number. Then no less must we inquire why and how my brain's farting. Why and how it is sometimes a number and sometimes a magnitude which is generated, if indeed the not one is oddness and has the same nature. For it cannot be out of one and the same, or as out of some number, that magnitude would also arise, as is clear. So this is sort of going back to this aseity question, right? If something's self-existing, then it wouldn't really be easy for you to like say something along the lines of, how do I put it, that like it's self-sufficient, or like if you just have a oneness, then it doesn't make sense for things to exist. But if there's a magnitude, then there isn't a oneness. The next puzzle after this one is whether numbers and bodies and planes and points are a kind of substance or not. For if on the one hand they are not, then it escapes us what the being is and what are the substances of entities. For affections and processes and relations and dispositions and ratios are not thought to indicate the substance of anything, for they are all said of some object, and none of them is this such, is a this such. But the things that might particularly be thought to designate substance, water, earth, and fire, and air, from which composite bodies are composed, of these warmth and coldness and such like are the affections, not substances, and the body that undergoes them is the only thing that persists, being a kind of entity and a kind of substance. Yeah, so he's saying here essentially that like if it's numerically defined, if the substance of a thing is numerically defined, then it wouldn't be able to indicate what it is, because they're not really indicating, they're sort of about the thing, but they're not the thing itself, right? They're sort of just, secondary things. But then if it's physical material stuff that makes up the substance, then it wouldn't be the substance, because then the substance would be something that doesn't persist in the thing. That's the objection here, as far as I can tell. Like, this is the dilemma. But indeed, body would be less of a substance than surface, and this than line, and this than the monad and the point. For it is by these that body is defined, and it is thought that they can exist without body, whereas it is not possible that body can exist without them. It's true that like points and lines can exist without a body, but the body needs some sort of spatio-temporal location, right? That is why both the majority and the earlier thinkers thought that entity and substance were body, and that the other things were affections of it, so that the principles of bodies would also be the principles of entities, while those more recent or wiser thought that they were numbers. The Pythagoreans he's referring to here. So, as we said, if these things are not substance, there is in general no substance and no entity, for it is certainly not appropriate to call the affections of these entities. But now, if this is agreed that lengths and points are rather substances than bodies, yet we still do not see of what sort of bodies these should be, for it is impossible that they should be among the perceptibles. And so there would turn out to be no substance. And it also seems that all these things are divisions of bodies, in width, depth, and length. And in addition, there is similarly present in the solid some sort of shape or none. There are similarly present. This guy cannot do English grammar. Get this translator out of here. This is, if you don't know, this is a Penguin translation, right? So this, you would think it would be a reputable, easy translation, but the grammar in here is so wonky. It's so, like, it throws you off so much. Get him out of here, I say. Get him out of here. So that if the Hermes is not in the stone, then neither is the half cube in the cube, in the way that it is defined, and so neither would the surface be, for if it is of any kind, then this would also be the one that is marked off the half, and the same goes for points, lines, and monads, so that if body is substance most of all, and some more than others, but that not even the latter are substances, it escapes us what the being is and what is the substance of entities. Basically, he's saying here, as far as I can tell, if substance is numerical, let's say, then we hit this wall where we can't really define things because of this. Because the monad, the numerical value of something is imperceptible, basically. And then if it's imperceptible, then it can't really be defined, sort of, type of thing. Similar pros and cons. Yeah, because then there wouldn't be a half cube in a cube because it's all definitional, right? But he's saying, well, there is a half cube in a cube, so this numerical way of defining things doesn't really work. For in addition to what has been said, it also turns out that our account of creation and destruction does not make sense. Okay, now we're on to a different problem. This is probably going to be the last problem, second last problem. Does not make sense. For it is thought that substance, if it is not prior in actuality or should not be posterior, suffers these things from being created and being destroyed. But it is not possible that points and lines and surfaces should be either created or destroyed, sometimes being and sometimes not. Yeah, that's true. You can't have sort of immaterial things be created and destroyed along with the body of something. So this is another refutation of the numerical way of describing reality. For whenever bodies are touched or divided, then either a single one touched or two divided arise, so that it is not agreed to be destroyed. Then when they are divided, ones that did not previously exist now do, for the individual point could not be divided into two. And if they do get created or destroyed, from what would they be created? Yeah, okay, I see what he's getting at here. Again, numerical things can't be created and destroyed, but a monad, a single point, cannot be divided because it's a single point. If it were to be divided, then it would be like an area, not a point, because you can divide an area but not a point. And the situation over time is the same as that in the present, since this too cannot come into existence and cease to be, but always seems to be something else, not being some substance. And it is also clear that this applies to points, lines, and planes. The argument is the same, for they are all in the same way, either divisions or boundaries. Okay, last chapter, beta 6. I thought it was, did it say gamma at the start, or am I crazy? What page are we on? 125. Let's go up. I thought the whole thing was called book. No, it was beta. Why did I say gamma? Why was I thinking gamma? Am I crazy? Oh, I'm schizophrenic. Alright, either way. And we might in general pose the puzzle why we should also seek certain other things beyond the perceptibles and the intermediaries, such as the posited forms. For if it is because the mathematicals differ from the latter in some way, and that the many are of the same form, this makes no difference, so that their principles will not be defined in number, just as the numerical principles of our lines will not be circumscribed altogether, but will be in form, if one should not be given a syllable or vowel. And of these they will also be numerically circumscribed, and the same will go for the case of intermediaries. For they are also co-specifics. For their two co-specifics are limited. They are also co-specifics. That I don't know what this is saying. For their two co-specifics. For their two co-specifics are limitless. This is not like. This is like a run-on sentence. Yeah, I do not like the writing in this. This is written. I don't know how hard it is to translate, so I'm not going to give the guy too much crap, but it is very hard to read. So that if there are not, in addition to the perceptibles and mathematicals, certain other entities, which some call forms, there will be no numerically single substance, nor will the principles of entities be of a certain number, but only in form. If then this necessity if then this is necessary, then it is necessary for this reason to posit the forms. So it's saying like, yeah, well, the numbers, the Pythagorean number theory just isn't working. So it has to be form that makes the substance of a thing. Who have supported them and have not argued well. This is still what they want, and it is necessary that they should say this, that each of the forms is a kind of substance and nothing accidental. But if indeed we suppose the forms to exist, and that the principles are one in number but not in form, we will be articulating a possibilities as necessary consequences. And next to these, there is the question whether the elements exist potentially or in some other way. For if they do in some other way, then there will be something else prior to the principles. For the potentiality is prior to that type of cause, and is not necessary that all the potential should be in that way. But if the elements do exist potentially, then it is possible that none of the entities exist. For that which does not yet exist is also a potential existent. For that which is not comes into being, and nothing comes into being of the things that cannot be. These then are the puzzles which we must deal in connection with the principles, and also whether they are general, or as we claim particular. For if they are general, they will not be substances. For none of the common things signifies this such, but of such a kind, whereas substances is a this such. But if some this such is to exist, and the universal category be excluded, then Socrates will be many things, both himself and a man and an animal, and if each one of these indicates a this such and a unity. If then the principles are general, this turns out, but if they are not universal but as particulars, then they will not be knowable, for knowledge is always of generalities. So other principles which are universally predicated will be prior to the principles, if there is to be knowledge of them. Yes, this is going back to that issue of what's the substance of a thing, and how do you place it, or where do you place it in order for you to have a sensible definition of reality, right? Of things, because again, if you go to universal, then sort of there's no distinguishing. But in this case, if it's if the essence is too particular, then you can have one thing that's actually many things, which doesn't make sense. Wow, that was tough. That was certainly tough. But that's where I'm going to leave it today. I hope you all... I think I had 0 viewers this whole time. So that sucks. But if any people watch the VOD, I hope you enjoyed listening to my ramblings. Thank you for watching. And I am Sinner. And I will see you all in the next one. See ya!